If I go,
That's gonna be fun.
If I go over the deep end, you got to throw me a life preserver. Don't let me drown. All right. Let's just all be like pensive Jeff Wilson right now and think about week 14. All right. Let's go. How do I do that? Live week 14. Maybe not the most entertaining week unless you started Dalvin Cook. Dr. Gene Bramall is on assignment. However, he will be back Sunday morning with Chris Allen and I as we answer start-sit questions. Of course, if you're a footballguys.com subscriber, you get all of Dr. Gene's great content, his midweek updates, his Sunday morning updates. So he will have you on top of all of those things. And Matt Waldman, I'm going to give you the honor of the game update against those Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, at this point, the Vikings got back Eric Kendricks and Anthony Barr, who they were missing against Detroit last week, and Detroit burned them for a couple of early scores and were able to run against them because they had Nick Vigil and the rookie Troy Dye out of Oregon, and both were kind of reactive players, kind of in the vein of the Pittsburgh defense right now that tends to kind of overreact a little bit at the linebacking core and has given up some big gains to Dalvin Cook on the outside, including one long gain off the right side for a touchdown. And as a result of the run game working and them getting into the second level and Cook getting a number of nice runs, you also have those nice, easy over routes that come against, what you would call as man-to-man coverage, but it's really essentially one side of the field playing man-to-man and the other side kind of playing a zone where you have a safety over top and a corner outside, and they're hoping that they can get to Kirk Cousins off play action before he has time to find Justin Jefferson. Well, that hasn't quite worked. Justin Jefferson's been getting those long developing over routes and caught a touchdown on a kind of a deep corner, like a long developing corner or crosser to the far, the deep pylon. So he's had a nice day too. KJ Osborne's made some chain moving type of plays over the middle in relief. But it's bad when Tyler Conklin, who's a scrappy player, a good player, but when they have a 3rd and 18 and he gets a first down on a 3rd and 18 on like a short seam route that gets most of it after the catch, and Devin Bush, it looks like he's like looking for directions on the Cleveland Turnpike, like he's still stuck there, So that's kind of making his way between Michigan State and Pittsburgh. So it's it's one of those tough things that Pittsburgh just looks bad at this point, mainly because their trench play isn't that good. What they have to rely on are basically wide receivers and an edge rush, and that can't get it done if you don't have the big boys up front.
No, it cannot. And it's disgraceful, to be honest, because everything looks so easy against the Steelers defense. It's never supposed to look like that. And it's not, there's not a quick fix here. TJ Watt can single-handedly keep them in games when they're playing with a little more spirit. The team just looks dejected. And they should be. They should be with this showing on national TV in front of everybody. But I'm not going to dwell on that. Let's go back to our cover boy, Chris Allen. Let's go back to Jeff Wilson. Let's start looking ahead, because this second half, well, it may affect some fantasy football matchups, but the meaningful football is over. There's a lot of meaningful football coming up on Sunday. It looks like, and Dr. Gene again is going to fill us in on Sunday, Jeff Wilson had a knee flare-up, but he's getting in limited practices. They're playing at Cincinnati, matchup of those two Super Bowls, one all-time classic Super Bowl. And we have Elijah Mitchell with a concussion, and his knee isn't exactly feeling great either. What's your level of confidence when people ask you when they ask us on Sunday morning about Jeff Wilson this week?
I would feel like somewhat not as confident about starting Jeff Wilson, just because of, even if he does wind up being active, almost in a similar sense of the Rams talking about like having Darrell Henderson active, but then not even like having him play for even a single snap like this past weekend. What's the amount of opportunity we can reliably project for Jeff Wilson? And even if we think the matchup might be decent, I mean, Cincinnati did kind of put the clamps down on the Chargers, at least from a rushing perspective, and held Austin Eckler to at least a respectable day, like on the ground. He wound up getting there, of course, like once he found the paint. But I think that with the matchup, And then also without having at least a clear sense of how much we can rely on him from a play-to-play basis, if he's going to be able to hold up for the entire game. And I would have some at least a lack of confidence in being able to start him. But really the question does come down to who else on your roster you might be able to start over him at this point in the season. You might have a couple more options. I know that some folks might have been relying on somebody like Alexander Madison to go tonight, but obviously that didn't happen because of Dalvin Cook returning to the lineup. But either way, with the way that things are kind of shaping up from a running back perspective and who might be available out there on the waiver wire, I mean, it's going to be a tough decision to make. And at least right now, with the way things are shaping up, I mean, Kyle Shanahan not sounding all too confident in his availability or even how much he's going to be available, even if he is active for the game. I mean, it just makes me think that while I'm not as confident in Hasty, I mean, there has to be some sort of viable option within that San Francisco offense, and it might wind up being JaMychal Hasty. But for Jeff Wilson, I think it's more of a let's give tomorrow. Let's wait and see what notes we get from Kyle Shanahan. I mean, maybe marinate on that over the weekend, and then we'll have a better decision, or at least a better way to make a decision on Sunday morning.
Matt, what if we hear on Sunday morning or over the weekend that Wyoming Cowboy baby Brian Hill, who was signed earlier this week, is going to be active for the game, combined with that hesitation that Kyle Shanahan has been talking about? Can Brian Hill be one of these December heroes, the 0th string running back to in our fantasy football lineups?
He could, though it's going to be puzzling to know whether Hill or JaMychal Hasty get the bulk of the touches if Wilson is not able to go. Now, the thing in favor of Hill is that at Wyoming, he played in the gap scheme. They ran a lot of toss. They ran a lot of the type of plays that you saw with the 49ers. And that's where he was really a best fit. In Atlanta, he ran a lot more zone, and he struggled a little bit with that early on in Cincinnati and then in Atlanta, but improved enough that, he was someone that had earned a second string touches at least the year before he was let go with the coaching change and wound up in Tennessee. And then they cut him as well. I think they would like to have him back. But he's not extremely fast either. He's not a super fast guy. He can get into the secondary. He's a powerful runner. And he's kind of a guy, though, that could fit well in this. It's just about, though, what the 49ers like to do with their system. And what they like to do with their system is, again, simulate the punt return. Well, Deebo Samuel's groin is still an issue. So if he's not playing, and then also Jeff Wilson can't play, I would think he would roll with the guy that he's most familiar with, which is JaMychal Hasty. But then you also have to think about who's the wide receiver most likely to get the punt return duty from the backfield that Deebo Samuel gets. And that comes down to two players, Trent Sherfield and Jawan Jennings. Now, Jennings is a kind of an SEC fan's favorite out of Tennessee, who's very good after the catch, a good blocker, physical guy for his size, but he's not very fast, but Sherfield seems to be a guy that they used him running a lot of Samuel's misdirections and jet sweeps, in some, and there might be some opportunities for him to be able to do that on Sunday. So if you're really desperate and you have a flex play, you might want to look at Sherfield as a possibility to be that guy to get some red zone touches and to run the ball on some of that misdirection and also just those, toss plays, because I'm kind of more interested in who gets those, whether it's going to be a running back or a wide receiver, which means to me that this week, I don't want to touch really any of them other than maybe Hasty. If they say Hasty's the starter, I'm good. If they don't, they call up Brian Hill. I'm basically waiting a week because I want to see how this develops.
Yes.
You can add Hill as a preemptive guy. I recommended him as a kind of a guy to monitor this week. You may want to preemptively add him, but that's it, And
it's Atlanta, Tennessee, and Houston coming up the next 3 weeks after this week. So that's why you want to pay close attention to this, because obviously Elijah Mitchell's not right. Jeff Wilson's not right. JaMychal Hasty, I think they only trust him as a passing down back based on how they've used him. Trey Sermon's on IR. And that leaves Brian Hill. All right, Chris, there's a player this week that we get paid the big bucks to make decisive calls, right? And when we were doing the preview with Cecil and I this morning, when we got to this player, Chris, I said, man, I don't know. I think you're kind of on your own this week. It's week 14. Either it's a fantasy playoffs or it's a matchup or fantasy playoff seeding or spots or relying on it. So you have gotten this far into the season. You're still paying close attention. You listen to the Audible or you subscribe to Footballguys, then you're pretty savvy. I'm going to say you're on your own when it comes to Saquon Barkley. What say you, Chris Allen?
I say, yeah, you're also on your own. Yeah, I get the well, because there's always that chance that he could break
one play.
Yeah, that one play, and that's all it takes. And especially like this week, I mean, I know that the matchup isn't the greatest, but going up against the Chargers, I mean, of course, it's entirely possible that he winds up having one of those long plays, and we've seen it for the past few weeks, having the ability for opposing running schemes capable of running against them. So I just think it's entirely possible that Barkley can wind up being that guy that we've seen in the past. It's just a difficult ask at this point with the Giants being where they're at right now from an offensive standpoint. We don't even know who their quarterback is going to be right now. I mean, that's the biggest thing. I mean, whether it's Jake Fromm or Mike Glennon gets cleared, or whatever Daniel Jones is doing with the next specialist that he saw. So I think it's difficult to trust the Giants offense as a whole. We don't even know what their pass catchers who's going to be out there catching passes. So with that entire offense in disarray, I do think that, I mean, if folks are starting him, they're probably just starting him based off of name value. The fact that he can wind up breaking one of those long runs, I mean, while it's in the cards, especially against the Chargers defense, I get it. But at this point, I mean, again, it's almost going back to the same thing we were talking about with Jeff Wilson and the rest of us. You might not have better options on your roster, but at this point, you are looking for that home run ability, which I think he showed in bits and pieces last week. But overall, it's tough to believe that he's going to be able to get back to that RB1 upside that we expected of him coming into the season.
Yeah. I mean, maybe he can come on to have a decent finish, but it was only a lot of short receptions last week in PPR leagues that made him anything but a total loss. And like you said, we don't know who the quarterback's going to be. Maybe Sterling Shepard will be back this week. Maybe Kenny Galladay's going to play. It looks like he got a limited practice in. But Matt Waldman, if we're weighing, we have the scale, we have Saquon Barkley on one side. Let's say, for instance, a Green Bay running back, A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones. Hey, it's a committee. All of the Giants touches with Saquon Barkley have to be better than half of the Green Bay touches. It doesn't sound right to me. So I'm probably trying to talk myself out of playing Saquon Barkley this week. What about you?
Well, isn't Devontae Booker going to be available? So if he is, then you might find yourself in a committee from the standpoint that Devontae Booker has, hasn't been that much of a step down from Barkley due to the offense and Barkley's injuries. I would go with Green Bay just mainly that the opportunities for high leverage touches are there for Green Bay. Now, The thing is if you're desperate, I would roll with Barkley from this standpoint. Especially if it is Jake Fromm, because Jake Fromm's going to get thrown to the wolves if he's there. He's basically been signed off the practice squad of Buffalo. He's a week and a half ago. So he's had he's had 10 days to learn an offense. And now he's going to and see when the cat comes, so that means that
taking after Zook.
That's predatory, so they know that there's mice that they can prey on here.
The cat's not away.
And Jake Fromm is the mouse in this particular case because, look, bad offensive line, turnstile for receivers. The receivers, if Kadarius Toney were healthy, I'd be happy about that. But Kenny Galladay basically got his big contract after getting padded with training wheels around him in Detroit and showed what he really is in New York, which is a speedster who can go up and jump and make jump ball catches. Well, Equanimeous St. Brown can kind of do that to an extent, just not quite as fast. And I'd say he's a half step up from Equanimeous St. Brown. He just doesn't have a quarterback to throw the ball to. And as a result of that, you're looking at him and he's dejected. He doesn't even know how to he's not playing on the level of professionalism that you would expect either in terms of trying. So you look at that and it's like Jake Fromm's going into a bad situation. Who's he going to throw to? Probably Saquon Barkley. The check down's going to be it. And while I would say with most teams, they're just going to cover that check down and be able to make plays, the weakest part of the Chargers defense are their linebackers. Their linebackers miss tackles. They take bad angles. They're too aggressive. And, Kenneth Murray, fantastic young player in a lot of ways, but he's also the guy that he's that guy that you almost think that he closes his eyes and runs as hard as he can in one direction. And then when he opens them, he realizes that he's 5 yards in the wrong direction. This was happening with him in Oklahoma. We've seen it at times here. Tranquilli is another guy who misses tackles, doesn't look good. So I look at this situation, and if there's a chance for Barkley to have a home run on a quick pass or a screen or a little throw out or a deeper throw on a wheel route, maybe where he gets to beat a linebacker, this is the team you want to face. And I'll add to it this way. When you think about just bad decisions that one can make late in the playoffs, I have a case of that right now because with a team that I know that's going to the playoffs, I dropped the Vikings this week, the Vikings defense this week to pick up the Chargers. So I can guarantee you that what likely will happen is the Chargers will give up some big plays this week, and suddenly we'll look at Jake Fromm and go, wow, he looked better with 10 days than Daniel Jones. No, he's not going to look that good. But it'll be a miracle if he surprises. If he survives.
You mentioned the Kenneth Murray thing. We've been chronicling that on the IDP show, Matt, and I thought Brandon Staley was going to fix him, but maybe it just was a bad pick. And absolutely, this is one where in fantasy football terms, you can either put a chip on the excellence and incredible traits that Saquon Barkley has, or you can put a chip on, well, what else do the Chargers have to do except stop Saquon Barkley? I mean, to assign 2 guys to Saquon Barkley on every play. And by the book, this should be a miserable game for him. Now, and for folks that rely on him, but Saquon Barkley can change that script. Not necessarily, there is a changing of the script in Carolina, Chris. What do we think about Chuba? I want to call him Old Mother Hubbard because, hey, they want to run the ball 30 plus times. So even if Cam Newton gets 12 of those, that leaves a decent amount for Chuba Hubbard, and they play Atlanta. So we're not sticking our neck out for Jeff Wilson or a San Francisco back this week. Would we stick our neck out for Chuba Hubbard?
Yeah, I think that's fine because based off of the matchup, even if he is stuck in some sort of timeshare with Amir Abdullah, the matchup at least lends itself to either of the two being productive from a rushing standpoint. And of course, Cam Newton will most likely be the one to vulture some of the high value touches. But I think overall, from an opportunistic standpoint, you can't ask for a better spot. I mean, look at the running backs that Atlanta has faced recently. I mean, heck, Leonard Fournette, on down the line the past few weeks. I mean, any of the teams that have played the Falcons, and the running backs have wound up being at least the positive end of expectation from a fantasy output perspective. So even though, and I know we've had conversations internally within Footballguys about who's going to be the passing down back, who's going to wind up being the one that at least takes over parts and pieces of Christian McCaffrey's workload that we wanted Chuba to have, at least at the start of the season. And while Abdullah has shown the ability to at least take over some of that pass catching role, I think overall, if the team is already starting to at least show signs, or at least from the reports that we're seeing about Matt Rule wanting to run the ball more, and if they want to try and at least protect as much of that offense as they can and get at least, let's say, stumble through or limp through the rest of the season, then sure, I guess it makes sense that you would continue to use Chuba Hubbard. I would have more confidence in starting him than any of the San Francisco guys. I mean, at the very least, we know that overall the Panthers should be able to move the ball against Atlanta's secondary. Cam Newton, for as many question marks that we have about him as a passer, given Atlanta's secondary, I mean, again, he should be able to connect with DJ Moore. I don't know about Robbie Anderson, but at least the volume and the production should still at least be there, that they can continue to move the ball overall. And so that Chuba or Amir Abdullah can at least be the ones to benefit from all of that. So yeah, I'm with that call, at least. And again, like I mentioned beforehand, like either of those two guys, I think would have at least a better output from a fantasy perspective than any of the San Francisco guys, at least until we get more clarity on their situation.
Yeah, Chuba had 24 for 82 and a touchdown in the first matchup between these two teams. It was an ugly 19-13 game. And Sam Darnold still had 8 carries for 66. So there was room there. And, that probably Matt Rule was looking at that game saying, perfect, exactly the way we drew it up. But by the way, Matt, I got to ask you, what did you think, or did you think anything when we heard as the games were going on last week that Joe Brady got fired?
I was kind of surprised by that. I mean, it was kind of absurd that
yes,
would happen.
Thank you. Thank you.
I mean, what did he do? I just have to say, speaking of absurd, while you guys were talking, they're showing Bud Grant and giving a little television tribute to Bud Grant. And if you look at Bud Grant, oh my God, especially with the photo of him as a youth on a basketball team, you would think that Gene Bramall or Gene Bramall's eldest is related to Bud Grant. Like that's their uncle or grandfather or Gene's father. Because, oh my God, the resemblance is kind of uncanny.
Yeah.
Not the older Bud Grant, but like I'm looking at it right now. So anyway, speaking of absurd things, but when you look at Joe Brady getting fired like that, you would have to think that he had a major difference of opinion with the coaching staff, and that it got to a point that their ability to even coexist was awful. It was either a major Cold War or they had it out behind the scenes. That had to have happened on some fashion, because otherwise you could look at Sam Darnold and that, or they said that, or maybe it was that they pinned, I don't know this at all, but I would think that the only other case is that they pinned Sam Darnold on Brady, that Brady was
scapegoat.
Like, don't draft any of these these rookies, go with Sam Darnold. And if that was the case, then yes, they probably were like, he's got to go. And that, because that would be the way for the head coach to save his job, was to pin it on Brady and say, I wanted a young quarterback. He wanted a retread. Now we're stuck with Cam Newton right now and hoping for the best, to survive the season.
Yeah. And by the way, since you mentioned Bud Grant, again, it's a Viking show, everybody. Because last week we saw the Bears and the Cardinals. I had a little trip down memory lane on the preview show for Denny Green, all-time great man, great Vikings coach. He actually went to the playoffs, I think, 9 straight years with 7 different quarterbacks. Nice. That's beautiful. Is that from the Wilt Chamberlain game?
This is Gene Bramall Sr., Bud Grant.
This is Bud Grant. Okay.
Yeah. See if we can show let me see if I can show. See right there? That looks like Gene's son. I mean, like that. That's pretty.
That's the Minneapolis Lakers, isn't it?
Wow. Yeah.
The reason I thought it was the Wilt Chamberlain game was because Dennis Green was actually at that game. He grew up in the Harrisburg, Hershey area. He was at the Wilt Chamberlain 100-point game. Anyway, I always like to remember Dennis Green because he was really one of a truly, truly good man. We remember him for that rant and lots of other things, but he was a great coach, and it's a shame that he didn't get a chance to coach in the Super Bowl, thanks to Gary Anderson. Okay, all this depressing memories. Let's maybe cheer things up. I don't know. Chris, are folks going to be cheered up if they play Taysom Hill? He had one of the worst games and yet a great fantasy game last week. He's going to play with his busted up finger, and he's playing the Jets. So Gardner Minshew looked like the second coming of insert your favorite quarterback last week against the Jets. What will Taysom Hill look like?
Pretty much the same thing. I mean, that's part of maybe a larger discussion on quarterback scoring for fantasy football, where you can throw 4 interceptions, but if you run for over 100 yards, then you're still essentially a quarterback one in any particular week. Now that's a whole other discussion. But if he goes from playing against, let's say at the very least, a tougher defense than what he faced this past week. And now he faces one of the easier defenses in the league. I mean, if Gardner Minshew can come in, and of course, all praise like to Minshew coming in on short notice, tossing 2 touchdowns to Dallas Goedert, who, if I'm remembering the report correctly, he hadn't had like much practice connecting with him like from a passing perspective. So for him to come in and put on the performance that he did, I mean, excellent job on his part. So now Taysom Hill coming in, of course they lose Deontay Harris because of the DUI suspension, but he still has at least like multiple pass catchers that at the very least we know can move the ball, whether it's Traquan Smith, Marquez Callaway, I mean, any of those guys. And of course he gets back Alvin Kamara. We know what he can do from a passing perspective as well. So I'm all for, I mean, Taysom Hill is probably like the easiest quarterback streamer decision that most folks could make, because even if his finger is continuing to be a problem for him, and that sounds to be the case, at least from the practice reports that I've seen so far this week, there's no other better matchup for him in order to at least be a viable fantasy starter. Like, is he going to wind up having like the QB1 heights that he just had this past week? Maybe not. I mean, we saw Philadelphia take their foot off the gas, like once they wound up, getting up as much as they did this past weekend. So while he might not have like the same fantasy output that he did last week, I mean, given the matchup, given at least what the Saints passing game does have to offer, like with their wideouts and even like their tight end, I think there's enough there for Taysom to at least be able to move the ball and then put him back right back into the top 12 discussion after this weekend.
Yeah, I understand breaking ties in favor of Taysom Hill because of the running ability and the matchup. And the thing is, a quarterback this week, we talked about this a bit last week, Chris, it's not clear. There's not a lot of slam dunk plays at quarterback as we head into the fantasy playoffs. And a lot of teams that got there with somebody else, if they don't put in Taysom Hill, what's funny is they may put in Taysom Hill this week or fail to put him in this week, see him go off against the Jets, and then maybe get induced to play him against better defenses and regret it. But I think you hit on the most important thing. Taysom Hill may kick off debates of how many negative points interceptions should be if he keeps playing like this. Folks need to know that if you're a Football Guy subscriber, you get to read the top 10 from Matt Waldman, which is always appointment reading. And what I always love, Matt, is it's always unfiltered, direct observations from your brain. You're not trying to water anything down so that it's not controversial or going against the grain. But I think you have some observations that may inform folks now that it looks like Melvin Gordon is going to play. Now it is Detroit. Again, matchups kind of skew this. But how should folks feel about plugging Javonte Williams in this week? Is it possible that maybe we're a little drunk off of what he did in a losing effort against Kansas City?
I would say maybe a little tipsy, but not downright like, slobbering drunk, because when you look at Javonte Williams, he's a good back, and he's certainly more than qualified to be a strong starter, a running back one in fantasy leagues in terms of being a top 12, top 15 back easily with that offensive line, with the design of the run game, with the way that he plays. Now, is he the next coming of Marshawn Lynch, Jonathan Taylor, Nick Chubb combined with a little topping of Earl Campbell, the way I've heard a couple people talk about it in our space, over the past month? No, I think they're drunk. But I think that, I think that's a little much, and I think it's easy for that to happen because, you look at the games, people, when they listen to commentators and you listen to the way commentators talk, they have to make it sound like the player just made a Herculean effort. When if you examine how the play developed, you realize that there's a difference between good and great. Now, that may not seem like much of a difference in the box score when you're the number one fantasy back for the week. But so was Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and everyone, when you bring up to everyone and their mother that he played the Houston Texans that first game and didn't score a touchdown and had multiple chances, and the tackles he broke weren't all that impressive, they tell you, well, I respect what you do, but I don't really agree with it. Because again, he passed the eye test, but they don't really have a good, let's say, curriculum for how they look at what is good versus what is great. And that's okay. That's not their job. Well, for some it might be, but they haven't given it that kind of that intense scrutiny, and that's okay. That's just part of the process of learning. And so when you look at, someone like Williams, he's powerful. Is he like Jonathan Taylor powerful? No, he's like Mark Ingram, maybe Mark Ingram slightly plus powerful, and we're splitting hairs here if you've got a good offensive line, but it's not enough for him to take over the job from Melvin Ingram this year. Ingram's going to be, Melvin Gordon. Gordon's going to be gone at the end of the year, but if he's ready to play, they're going to split this backfield again. Maybe Williams gets more of the touches this week, and I think he's a fine start, moving forward, but you're not going to take another back who's going to get, who's a solid starter, been delivering consistent top 10, top 15 efforts for you and bench him in favor of Javonte Williams.
Yeah. And Melvin Gordon, by the way, said he wants to stay in Denver next year. So
groans
heard in the fantasy football world.
Good luck with that. And I'll add to the Taysom Hill thing and say, check out little Jordan Humphrey. Speaking of former running backs, he's had a couple of nice weeks. He's worked with Taysom Hill well, and they use him on those over routes in the middle of the field, off play action that are longer developing. And he's had like 96 yards and a touchdown over the past 2 weeks combined. And with the play action, the Jets are vulnerable in the middle of the field. That's where they're vulnerable on defense. And if CJ Mosley's back is bothering him enough that he can't play, he was really the only, limiting force for that team last week. So if that happens, that's a guy that if you're desperate, he could be a good one for you.
On the Taysom Hill discussion, I want to point out our chat room's awesome. We have a fantastic chat room. Carl Mahler says, how about dynamic scoring for quarterback interceptions? -1 for the first pick, -2 for the second pick, and so on.
I like that.
So, I like it. Well, I think that just to take this up, because it's a Thursday night kind of topic, right? Just to take this up, I think that -1 or -2 for interceptions does not reflect the actual damage it does to the team. So it would make sense to make it a -3 or -4 play because it actually is that impactful or even more impactful in some cases. I mean, you might even add something where there's extra negative points depending on the length of the return, depending on if it's a red zone interception, add a -1. If it's an interception inside of your own 20, add on a -1. If it's returned for a touchdown, add on a -3. There are ways to make this map to significance. I mean, that's one of those things where with fantasy football, there's so many different ways that it's a puzzle. And I'll solve any puzzle, or I don't want to solve it, but I'll do my best to solve it. Just give me the parameters. But at the same time, the further we get from the significance of events on the football field, the more it maybe loses some meaning for people. So I like that. And I like that we can just see even among our chat room, there are some different approaches to this question. Now, where can we go? Well, Chris, I'll just give you an open-ended question. Here, okay? Who is somebody that folks might be on the fence about starting this week in this all-important week 14 that you would be more than willing to give them a nudge in the positive direction? I'll give you my player. Sorry if I'm stealing your player, but I'm stalling to give you some time to think about this, Chris.
Okay.
I don't know if very many folks realize that Russell Gage had 11 catches for 130 yards last week.
Yeah.
And he's playing Carolina. Now, we already talked about the Chuba Hubbard side of this, but I would assume, again, Stephon Gilmore is going to be on Kyle Pitts. Cordero Patterson has not been used as much in the passing game lately. He may be used more in the passing game here, but boy, this looks like another game where Russell Gage is just going to get a ton of play in the middle of the field. And in PPR leagues, he could be he was a 24-point play last week. I don't know about that because there was a lot of garbage time against Tampa. I don't know if there'll be that much garbage time in this game, but I think there's enough there that folks don't think in this point in the season, I'm starting Russell Gage. I think in a PPR league, if you start 3 wide receivers, Russell Gage is going to be tough to keep on your bench. Who's somebody else that you might give folks a nudge that they're looking at and a little sideways thinking, am I really going to start him with this much on the line?
Oh, well, I think one of the easier ones that folks might think about and might hesitate just because the lack of time that he's been out is Amari Cooper. Now, coming off of the COVID 2 weeks ago, COVID related symptoms in their game this past week, but now coming up against, and it's really weird how they wind up, like the schedule makers wound up putting this part of the season together, which I guess adds to the intrigue, right? Because they've got Washington this week, Giants the week after, and then Washington again in week 16. So, I mean, if we're already not at least somewhat concerned, or at least not concerned, but just like already on the edge of our seats regarding how the NFC is going to shake out, adding in those division games like right here at the end of the season or close to the end of the season, or especially during fantasy playoff time, it makes it even all that more intriguing from a matchup perspective. But when we saw Amari come back last week, while used only sparingly, I think only like 2 targets, we could at least see from a deployment perspective how he was still able to like get open on what the crossing route I think that he took for about 20 to 30 yards last week. And now with Washington's secondary, I think overall their defense is starting to play a little bit better. I mean, we're seeing some of the guys up front start to get a bit more pressure, but their back end, their secondary is still fairly vulnerable. And so I do have questions about Washington's offense as a whole, now down yet another player, like with Logan Thomas being out. So their inability to move the ball from on the offense, now coupled with some of the lapses they've had in their secondary. I know folks have probably found ways to get around not having Amari Cooper, and especially with CeeDee Lamb being CeeDee Lamb, I mean, and also having like the other options within the offense as well. I mean, if Tony Pollard currently dealing with the torn fasciitis thing, and now having less options for the Dallas Cowboys, I think if you were sitting on Amari Cooper, already tried to figure out what to do without him for the past few weeks, I mean, that's one of the easier ones that I can think of that let's just toss him right back in. I think now with an additional week, or even like essentially an extended week in order for him to get right, I think now that's one of the better matchups that I see for this week, or one of the better fantasy players that I'm ready to start and throw him back in my lineup.
Yeah, maybe that could also give folks a nudge to play Dak Prescott. I'm glad you brought up the schedule. I laid this out for Cecil when we were doing the preview show. They've created something like Thunderdome, the NFC East Thunderdome, over the last month of the season. Dallas plays 4 divisional games out of 5, and Arizona's the only one that's not a divisional game. New England, the Giants, who really care about the Giants? Well, they play 3 divisional games out of 5. Philadelphia, every game left is a divisional game. They're on bye, so 4. Every game Washington has left is a divisional game. They're going to finish with 5 straight divisional games. Dallas, Philadelphia, Giants. So this division is very much up for grabs. And even the Giants, I guess, are kind of alive. The point is the team that plays the best over the last month really is going to win this division because they're playing their divisional opponents. And who knows, maybe we have a new model. I know they changed it a few years ago. I don't remember how long. I say a few years ago because in my brain, everything feels like a few years ago. It must have been a little while back where week 17 was a divisional week, right? That created more intrigue. Maybe they can make December the divisional month. We'll see how this unfolds. Matt Waldman, are you going to give folks a nudge to play Russell Wilson at Houston this week?
I might, but I've got a crazier one.
Yeah. Oh, please do. Please.
Okay. Laquon Treadwell.
Oh!
Because if you look at Laquon Treadwell, here's the thing. They just don't have much in Jacksonville right now. He's their leading receiver the past 2 to 3 weeks. He is facing Tennessee, who is one of the worst defenses. And if you look at the profiles of players that have succeeded against defenses, they're all either the underneath receiver or the bigger receiver, and sometimes the combination of both, which is what Laquon Treadwell is. The guy who essentially doesn't separate in the vertical game, but can get you yards after the catch and get open in the zones. Well, that's what Laquon Treadwell basically has been, at a low level for a lot of teams. And he has a connection with Trevor Lawrence, and they keep playing him. And while it's not great points, if you're in that situation where you limped into the playoffs, and this is the fun part, because a lot of you've limped into the playoffs, and you need to have the mentality of like, look, these guys that I haven't been working for me. I could start the names, but I'm screwed. So let me go with the guy that might be playing well. And you see that they have they're facing Tennessee. And then after that, well, it's Houston and the New York Jets.
Right.
Now, if you get to week 17 and you got to face the Patriots, well, good luck there, but hopefully but you're in the money at that point. So, if you limp into the playoffs and you get to the championship game there, maybe something else opens up for you off of waivers at that point, where you can find somebody who's better, as a better option. But, Treadwell is a guy that's always been able to make the contested play. He's always been rugged at the catch point. He can break tackles. He's good on short, quick game type of routes. The issue is that he came in at the league at kind of the end of the Dez Bryant era, and he was a Dez Bryant type of player. And the league was like, we don't want a guy who can run 3 routes. We want a guy who can run most of the route tree. And we'll take some of these smaller guys who are really good technicians, and we want speed on top of that too. Because these trust throws aren't always going to work with the kind of defenders that we get. So as a result of that, when Adam Thielen started taking off that same year that Laquon Treadwell was drafted, and Thielen was really making more noise in camp, it was easy after a couple of years from the look of that and go, he's not fast. Let's just get rid of him. There's nothing, there's no returns here. And everywhere he went, that's been pretty much the case. So while I don't think he's going to remake his career and suddenly become like the player that was chosen in the first round, by the Vikings, I think he can give you flex points for the next 3 games and maybe more than a lot of your starters, especially in a PPR league. So there's that. And I would say, yes, Russell Wilson looked to be on target and on point. If Gerald Everett didn't somehow tip and then kick a ball, he would have had two scores in that game. He was pinpoint to DK Metcalf in a way that Metcalf could catch the ball, like we talked about his issues last week. Well, this week the ball was where it needed to be for Metcalf, not to have to be incredible. He just had to be good, and that's perfectly fine. So with that team, I think they'll be fine against Houston. And I would roll with Russell Wilson as a guy to continue going with here. Now, I will say this will be the great humor of our little clique here if Russell Wilson ends up a Bronco or a Steeler.
Yeah.
So I am praying that he winds up a Brown or a Saint, but he's not going to be a Brown either, most likely. So.
When Cecil and I were talking about that, Matt, I said the good thing about him coming down to New Orleans is that they'll get some hot sauce in his gumbo. You know what I mean? Like he needs a little hot sauce. Just a little. I mean, maybe
he might care. He might, but with him, he might get super odd, because I have a feeling that the thing with Russell Wilson is that the normal thing that he does, that is ultra bland and just like, I think that's him hiding what he really is, because he knows that he lets it slip out every once in a while. And when he does, it gets really kind of odd. And I don't mind odd, he's only like as Gene said. But I think for general public, he understands how that needs to be. Again, I mean, he looked like he was about to like fight Cecil when they asked him about Tim Tebow, which I actually like a great deal. But, I'm sure a lot of teams wouldn't have liked that.
What is it? Dr. Gene says it's not weird unless you make it weird.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, Chris, give me a little game update before I'll give you one more question and we'll sign off.
I mean, right now it looks like I don't want to say that the Steelers have any sort of life, but it is interesting after a short
Let me get my Steelers hat. Hold on.
Right, a short pass to Najee Harris in the flat that wound up getting him in the touchdown, and then on the very next drive, on a pass to who I thought it looked like it was to Justin Jefferson, ball pops up in the air, and then Kirk Cousins has his first interception of the game. So now the Steelers are driving, but there's still a 3 scores deficit at this point. Yeah. So while I know some folks are immediately starting to think about the demise of the Vikings, just shut it down. If you got other stuff to do right now, I'd go and do that. But it looks like this one's over. Right. We all have better things to do probably than watch this game. I love the terrible towel.
It's the closest thing I have to a terrible towel.
Nice. Hey, Myron Cope invented that. It's the first one to say, bring your dish towels down, your yellow dish towels down to the game. We're going to put a hex on the Steelers' opponent. Could the weather put a hex on any games this weekend for fantasy football, Chris?
No, it's going to be cold up in Green Bay, but nobody cares about that. I mean, we're already thinking about the running game, at least partially the running game for the Packers anyway, since Chicago's given so much on the ground after we just watched James Conner run roughshod over them. Kyler Murray bounced in for 2 scores. So now cold in Green Bay, a little bit of wind in Kansas City, but nothing that's really like piqued my interest. So it should be like a really decent game from a fantasy stance without having any weather, especially after the Monday night game. Will be anything like that in the forecast.
Even though it was a strangely compelling game, one of the more compelling football games I've watched, even though it was played in conditions that no football game should be played in. I plan on getting in a condition that anyone on the air should be in as I get in deeper into my 6-pack of cider, and we'll see what happens with the Steelers. It's always a wonderful thing to spend time with Matt Waldman, with Chris Allen, and with all the wonderful people in our chat room. Thanks, folks. You are always the best, the very best. You keep us company when we're depressed because, well, the Steelers, this is the end, my only friend. The end. This is the end of this show, folks, but we'll be back again Sunday morning. Chris Allen, Dr. Gene will be joining us to go over the injury news. And of course, again, if you're a Football Guy subscriber, you're going to get Matt Waldman's top 10. You're going to get the replacements. You're going to get all that great Matt Waldman content. And of course, you know about the Matt Waldman RSP. It's getting back to RSP season soon. So you want to be part of that.
Early bird next week.
Early bird opens up next week.
Yep. Early bird next week. There you go.
Beautiful, folks. So we try to help you stay on top of things 365, 24/7, because you are